The year was 1939, a year that would be etched into the annals of history as the beginning of one of the most devastating conflicts the world had ever seen. The world watched in trepidation as Europe erupted into chaos, the echoes of war reverberating across continents. Germany, under the iron fist of Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland with ruthless efficiency, marking the start of a brutal campaign. This act of aggression shattered the fragile peace that had followed the First World War, plunging the world into uncertainty and fear. The world was once again at war, nations mobilizing their forces and preparing for the long and arduous struggle ahead. World War II was a global conflict that engulfed nations and forever changed the course of human history. It was a war that spanned continents and oceans, involving countries from every corner of the globe. From the beaches of Normandy to the dense jungles of the Pacific, millions fought and died in battles that would determine the fate of nations. This war tested the limits of human endurance and the very definition of good and evil, as atrocities and acts of heroism were witnessed on an unprecedented scale. The seeds of this conflict were sown in the ashes of the First World War, a war that had left deep scars and unresolved tensions. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to ensure peace, instead bred resentment and instability, creating a powder keg of discontent. The global economic depression further fueled these tensions, creating fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root and spread like wildfire. It was in this climate of fear and uncertainty that figures like Hitler and Mussolini rose to power, promising their people strength and prosperity through conquest and domination, exploiting the desperation of the masses. The world watched in horror as Hitler's armies marched across Europe, crushing all opposition in their path with their blitzkrieg tactics. The Nazi war machine, fueled by a twisted ideology of racial superiority, seemed unstoppable, leaving a trail of destruction and despair. The world held its breath, bracing for a future shrouded in darkness, as the spectre of war loomed large over every nation. But hope, though flickering, was not extinguished. Leaders like Winston Churchill rallied their people, inspiring them to stand firm against tyranny. In the face of tyranny, ordinary men and women from all corners of the globe rose to resist, driven by a sense of duty and a desire to protect their way of life. They joined the fight, driven by an unwavering belief in freedom and justice, determined to restore peace and order. This was a fight not just for territory or resources, but for the very soul of humanity, a battle to uphold the values of liberty and human dignity. World War II was a clash of ideologies, a battle between freedom and oppression, between democracy and tyranny, shaping the ideological landscape of the modern world. It was a war that would redefine the geopolitical landscape and shape the world we live in today, laying the foundations for a new era of international cooperation and peace. The world was divided into two main factions: the Axis powers and the Allies, each with their own ambitions and ideologies. The Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy and Japan, sought to reshape the world order through military might and expansionist policies. Their aggressive strategies aimed to dominate and subjugate other nations. They were driven by a dangerous cocktail of nationalism, militarism, and a belief in their own racial superiority. This toxic mix fueled their ambitions and justified their brutal actions. Germany, still smarting from its defeat in the First World War, sought to reclaim its lost glory and expand its territory. Under Hitler's leadership, the nation embarked on a path of relentless conquest. Italy, under Mussolini, aimed to revive the Roman Empire and establish dominance in the Mediterranean. Mussolini's vision of a new Roman Empire drove Italy's aggressive military campaigns. Japan, a rising power in Asia, sought to secure resources and expand its influence in the Pacific. The Japanese military pursued a policy of expansion, seeking to dominate the region and secure vital resources. On the other side of the battle line stood the Allies, a coalition of nations united against the Axis threat. Initially, this alliance consisted primarily of Great Britain, France, and the Commonwealth nations. These countries stood together, determined to resist the Axis onslaught. These countries were joined later by the Soviet Union and the United States, forming a powerful coalition united in their determination to defeat the Axis threat. The entry of these two superpowers significantly bolstered the Allied forces. The Allied nations, despite their differences, shared a common goal to defeat fascism and preserve freedom and democracy. Their unity was crucial in facing the formidable Axis powers. Great Britain, led by the unwavering Winston Churchill, stood as a bulwark against Nazi aggression in Europe. Churchill's leadership and resolve inspired the British people to endure and fight on. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, bore the brunt of the Nazi war machine on the Eastern Front. The Soviet resistance was fierce and played a pivotal role in weakening the Axis forces. And the United States, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, mobilized its vast industrial and military might to turn the tide of the war. American production and manpower became a decisive factor in the Allied victory. The clash between these two alliances was a global conflict of unprecedented scale and ferocity. Battles raged across continents, involving millions of soldiers and civilians. It was a war fought not only on land, sea and air, but also in the hearts and minds of people around the world. Propaganda and public support played crucial roles in sustaining the war efforts. The outcome of this titanic struggle would determine the fate of nations and the course of history for generations to come. The end of the war marked the beginning of a new era, reshaping the global order and setting the stage for future conflicts and alliances. Amidst the brutal realities of World War II, a horror unfolded that would forever stain the conscience of humanity: the Holocaust. Orchestrated by the Nazi regime, the Holocaust was a systematic and state-sponsored persecution and extermination of 6 million Jews across German-occupied Europe. Driven by a perverse ideology rooted in anti-Semitism and racial purity, the Nazis viewed Jews as an existential threat to the German nation. This hateful ideology, propagated through relentless propaganda, dehumanized Jews, portraying them as parasites and enemies of the state.
The Nazis established a vast network of concentration camps, designed not merely for imprisonment, but for extermination. These camps were factories of death, where innocent men, women and children were systematically murdered in gas chambers, worked to death, or subjected to horrific medical experiments.
The Holocaust was a crime of unimaginable cruelty and barbarity. It was a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity and the devastating consequences of unchecked hatred and intolerance. The world watched in horror as news of the atrocities emerged. The sheer scale of the genocide, the systematic brutality, and the callous indifference to human suffering shocked the world.
The Holocaust stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of civilization and the ever-present danger of unchecked prejudice and discrimination. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable horror. And it is a call to action for all of humanity to combat hatred, intolerance, and genocide wherever they may arise.
The Battle of Stalingrad, fought between August 1942 and February 1943, was a pivotal turning point in World War II. This battle, one of the deadliest in history, saw immense human suffering and strategic maneuvers that would change the course of the war. This brutal and costly battle, waged in the bombed-out ruins of Stalingrad, became a symbol of the unyielding resilience of the Soviet people. The city, reduced to rubble, stood as a testament to their determination and sacrifice, and the beginning of the end for Hitler's ambitions in the East. The defeat at Stalingrad marked the first major loss for the German army, signalling a shift in momentum. The German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, arrived at the outskirts of Stalingrad confident of victory. They believed their superior tactics and firepower would quickly overwhelm the Soviet defenders. They had swept across the Russian steppes, crushing all resistance in their path. Villages and towns fell one by one, and the German advance seemed unstoppable. Stalingrad, a strategically important industrial city on the Volga River, became the focal point of Hitler's ambitions to conquer the Soviet Union. Its factories and transportation links were crucial for the Soviet war effort. He believed that capturing this city, which bore Stalin's name, would be a decisive psychological blow. The fall of Stalingrad would not only cripple Soviet morale, but also serve as a propaganda victory for the Nazis.
However, the Germans underestimated the tenacity of the Soviet defenders. The Soviet soldiers, driven by a fierce sense of duty and patriotism, were prepared to fight to the last man, and the harshness of the Russian winter, the freezing temperatures and snow-covered battlefields created a nightmarish environment for the German troops, who were ill-prepared for such conditions. What ensued was a brutal urban warfare, a type of combat that the German army was not accustomed to. The close-quarters fighting in the ruins of the city was intense and relentless, a struggle for every street, every building, every inch of ground. The battle turned into a grueling test of endurance and willpower, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Soviet soldiers, inspired by a fierce patriotism and the defense of their homeland, fought with unwavering determination. Their resolve was bolstered by the knowledge that they were defending their families and their way of life. They were aided by the harsh Russian winter, which slowed the German advance and crippled their supply lines. The freezing conditions caused equipment to malfunction and made resupply efforts nearly impossible.
The Battle of Stalingrad became a war of attrition, a grinding struggle that inflicted heavy casualties on both sides. The relentless fighting wore down the German forces, who were unprepared for such a prolonged engagement. A grinding struggle that inflicted heavy casualties on both sides. The human cost was staggering, with thousands of soldiers and civilians losing their lives in the brutal conflict. The German Sixth Army, trapped and surrounded in the ruins of the city, was slowly decimated by relentless Soviet attacks, dwindling supplies, and the bitter cold. The encirclement, known as Operation Uranus, was a masterstroke of Soviet strategy.
On February 2, 1943, the remnants of the German Sixth Army surrendered. This surrender marked the first time a German field marshal had been captured, a significant blow to Nazi prestige. The Battle of Stalingrad marked a turning point in the war. The city, though devastated, became a symbol of Soviet resilience and determination. The Wehrmacht, once seemingly invincible, had suffered a catastrophic defeat. The loss at Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility and marked the beginning of a series of defeats for the Nazis. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. The defeat had a profound impact on German morale and marked a significant shift in the balance of power on the Eastern Front.
The victory at Stalingrad galvanized the Soviet people. It became a rallying point for the entire nation, inspiring them to continue the fight against the invaders, and inspired Allied forces around the world. The victory at Stalingrad boosted the morale of the Allies and demonstrated that the Axis powers could be defeated. It marked the beginning of the long and arduous Soviet counteroffensive that would eventually liberate Eastern Europe from Nazi occupation. The Red Army, emboldened by their victory, began to push westward, reclaiming territory and driving the Germans back.